Welcome to the game day training for New York State coaches and judges. We are going to cover Welcome to the game day training for New York State coaches and judges. We are going to cover what makes game day a great option for your program, the format of a game day routine, skill restrictions for the game day division, and of course, a breakdown of the scoring system. So what is game day? Well, game day is a great way to reward those teams who focus on traditional game day material versus competitive routines by allowing a division that encompasses the main components of the crowd leading experience. It also focuses on the execution of the performance rather than the difficulty of the routine. The game day categories include band dance or band chant, situational sideline, a timeout cheer, and finishes with the fight song. This division is great for teams looking to reward leadership on and off the field or court. The division stays true to the fundamentals of cheering on the sideline of your games and opens the door for more athlete participation with no difficulty requirements. You can now highlight those athletes that may be great with motions, crowd leading, prop work, and other sideline essentials, but may not be the strongest in building or tumbling. You can also use your mascot or combine other spirit teams like dance, drumline, or even flags to encompass the whole game day experience from your school. The best part of the game day division is that it is easy to keep costs down because full choreography isn't necessarily needed, especially if you have school traditions, and costly music mixes aren't required. The benefits of having a game day team is that game day is a wonderful opportunity to grow your cheer or spirit programs, allowing for increased participation based on sideline abilities and not difficulty of skills. This is also a wonderful division to open the doors to the competitive experience for your athletes if they may be new to competing. Practice times can be spent focusing on improving your sideline skills and working through obtaining a strong stunting progression. And the best is games are practice for your routine as well. This division will also make that competition and performance experience more comfortable for many of your athletes. One of the biggest benefits of game day format, aside from the cost, is that focus is on progression of skills and technique on the score sheet rather than reaching for those difficult skills or individual skills. This can greatly reduce injury as there is no reason to push speed of acquiring skills, and you can work on safety and progression at a comfortable speed for every athlete on your team. Now is a great time to start up a game day program as a competitive option because it not only retains the components of the traditional elements of a cheer program, but it is also a way to increase the presence of cheerleading programs in school districts that may be losing athletes or even entire programs due to injury or interest, and it also will help increase cheerleading presence within a school and community. Now, let's talk a little bit about how teams are judged. Teams are scored on execution, crowd effectiveness, energy, and overall performance. Deductions, while they do not exist in the traditional format you've become used to at a competition, still exist throughout the score sheet as falls can take away from numerous elements on each of the score sheets. It's more important to perform a game-ready routine rather than a routine with a chance of falls during stunts or pyramids or tumbling. The format of the game day routine is in the following order. Would start with your band chant, followed by your situational sideline, then your crowd leading cheer, and will end with the fight song. The total time should be 3 minutes max, and while New York State will be allowing teams to choose their sideline situation, typically it is important to be prepared for both as an announcer would normally cue the team to perform an offense or defense sideline. And also remember, leave time in between elements for spiriting. That's a crucial element to the format of your game day performance. It might not be on the score sheet, but it shows performance, it shows energy, and it shows the ability for your team to keep the crowd led even when they're not in the middle of one of their performances. The band chant is going to be the first element of your game day routine and should be consistent with traditional band chants used by teams on sidelines across the country. Teams need to be demonstrating spirit and enthusiasm from the moment they enter the floor And it's important to note that music will not be cued. Once the music starts, timing does begin. And for the band chant section, you cannot incorporate any skills other than kicks and jumps, just like you may have learned at summer camps. So no stunts, no pyramids, and no tumbling is allowed. Squads need to utilize spirit-raising props, which are essential to focus on creative movements such as level changes, ripples, execution of the material, and making sure that they are encouraging their crowd to participate during the band chant. Your next section is going to be the situational sideline. This will immediately follow the band chant, and in typical situations, the announcer is going to provide a cue for an offense or a defense sideline. The teams would then wait for the announcer to finish the cue and respond with the appropriate game day situation sideline. However, for New York State this year, you will be allowed to attend, performing either an offense or defense. It will be your choice. Squads should focus on crowd effectiveness, motion technique, and skills. Notice there are skills here, relevant to a game day environment. It is a requirement to incorporate skills into the sideline, which would be your stunts or tumbling, if you're in a division that allows it. Please review the skill restrictions for the situational sideline, actually for the entire game day performance. Following the sideline will be your crowd leading cheer. You must return to the performance surface after the sideline and before you begin your cheer. This shows a clear separation between the two elements. Teams can show spirited interaction as a clear transition, moving into their crowd leading material, but are not allowed to stunt during that time. Crowd leading can include a cheer, reflective of a timeout, general sideline, spell out, or other cheer material with minimal words, inciting a response and encouraging a crowd to yell along. It is very important that your cheer is extremely easy to follow. That way, the youngest person in your crowd, the oldest person in your crowd, or even the judges who have never seen you perform before would be able to participate. Teams should incorporate spirit props and practical skills, which would be stunts and or tumbling, if you're in a division that allows. And by practical skills, that does not mean the most difficult skills, that means the most practical skills for your team. This could be different for every single team at the event. What's practical for one is not necessarily practical for another. What matters is that your team could hit it 10 out of 10 times and it's game day ready. Following your crowd leading cheer, you're going to spirit until your music begins for the final section, which is the fight song. And this should be a traditional fight song. If your school has one, I definitely recommend using it. Otherwise, you could use a different band chant or something that your team would be able to practice at the game. Teams should incorporate crowd effective skills, stunts and or tumbling if the division that you are in allows, so you're not in a non-tumbling division or a non-building division, and can include spirit-raising props to enhance the overall effect. Adding those props definitely helps with crowd effectiveness. Fight song incorporation is limited to 3 consecutive 8 counts of stunts and or tumbling. So what that means is once you set for a stunt and you hit that load in, counts will begin and they will be counted at the exact same pace as the rest of your fight song routine. Or once you do that standing tumbling section and start transitioning to build, all of those need to be contained within 3 8 counts. Counting will begin with the initiation of a skill and continue until either the incorporation is complete or the end of the 3rd 8 count. If the fight song repeats, the incorporation will only be permitted both times if the skills are repeated exactly the same. So yes, you can do your 3 consecutive 8 counts in the first repeat, and then in that second repeat, if you perform it exactly the same, you may do it again. So having that stunts and tumbling or tumbling 2 times is allowed as long as it's identical to the repeating section of your fight song. For teams that do not have an official fight song, it is recommended to use a second selection of band chant music, which I mentioned earlier. Now let's take a look at the game day skill restrictions. Before we start though, remember, skills such as stunts and tumbling are not allowed during the band chant section of your performance. So here we go. No tosses, which includes baskets, sponge tosses, or elevator tosses, are allowed. No inversions will be allowed. No twisting released dismounts are allowed. Single leg stunts are limited to liberties and liberty hitches. So no heel stretches or arabesques, guys. No running tumbling is going to be allowed. Standing tumbling is limited to one tumbling skill, and a back tuck is the most elite tumbling skill allowed. So no back walkover, back handsprings, no back handsprings, and no standing fulls for my elite tumbling cheerleaders. Stunts are not allowed as transitions before or between sections. This is going to include entering the floor and between the situational sideline and the crowd leading cheer. Also note that the moves that you incorporate throughout your routine should also be appropriate for all audiences. Now let's take a look at the breakdown of the score sheets. Game day is broken into 2 score sheets. One score sheet will score the band chant and then comes back in to score the fight song. The second score sheet covers the situational sideline and the crowd leading section of the routine. In addition to these score sheets, there will be a safety official watching the routine for NFHS violations, violations to the format of the game day routine, so incorporating skills, as an example, in your band chant, or exceeding those 3 consecutive 8 counts in your fight song. And remember, skills will not be allowed remember those skills that will not be allowed during the game day routine. These will also be considered a game day format violation. Overtime violations and any other specific violation, which may include boundary, uniform policy, inappropriate choreography, etc., will also be taken into consideration by your safety official. Now, let's break these score sheets down. The game day situation, which is on your sideline, is the first category for the sideline section of the routine. Proper use of material is not referencing a proper cue. Performing an incorrect cue would be reflected on your safety violation sheet. For New York State this season, this deduction will not exist, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, as you can choose your cue, but it must be an offense or a defense cue, not a general cue. Following the situational sideline, teams will dismount, if in a stunt, returning all athletes to the ground prior to moving into the next section, which is your crowd leading cheer. Most importantly, on this score sheet, and referencing game day material, which is the first score of the cheer category, you want the cheer to be easy to follow, so not too wordy. This way, anyone could join in, whether they are seasoned crowd attendees or first-time spectators. You want the cheer to encourage the crowd to respond and participate, which is best done by utilizing callbacks and props. The cheer should be engaging to the crowd from the start, and it needs to include practical material. Again, what is practical for one team is not the same as what is practical for another. And don't forget, the skill needs to follow the game day restrictions. Poorly executed skills will distract from the crowd effectiveness of a routine, so all skill incorporation should be game ready and something a team can hit sharp, clean, and 10 out of 10 times. Second, on both the sideline and crowd leading score sheet sections, is crowd effectiveness. The team's voice needs to be loud and clear with appropriate inflection, building up to your callbacks, which would include your team mascots, colors, school name, etc. The voice needs to be maintained even during your builds and skills incorporated, so using those appropriate pauses for tumbling or dips to a stunt, not to lose the volume. And also, remember to avoid singing. You want to continue to build that voice inflection rather than hitting an up, down, up rhythm in your voice. For example, blue and white is more singing than blue and white. The pace needs to remain moderate and consistent, so avoid rushing through the words or slowing to an extreme slow pace, but also avoiding too many words that might affect the pace and ability for the crowd to follow along. The tempo needs to be consistent from beginning to the end. Piggybacking off of pace, The flow needs to be seamless. What this means is no abrupt transitions that would misdirect the crowd. Change to flow can also affect the ability for the crowd to participate if they are not familiar with your cheer. Finally, it's important to use maximum crowd coverage, so covering the width of the crowd, or for competition purposes, all 9 or 7 panels, rather than focusing so much on depth and intricacy of those formations. Motion technique and crowd leading tools is going to be the next category on both the sideline and cheer sections of the score sheet. Motion technique is looking for exactly that. Is the arm placement and levels consistent amongst all athletes? Are they sharp? Are they in the proper placement? Now, judges are not looking to dictate whether or not a high V should be wide or closed, but if the team is using the same and consistent placement. However, placement can be corrected in motions such as T motion placement, punches, K motions, etc., if being performed differently across the team. Also in high Vs if the team's not performing those the same. And these motions are scored whether on the ground or performed by an athlete who is in the air. The second part of the score is the proper use of props. When using a sign, it should be presented prior to expecting the crowd to call it back in order for the crowd to read the sign, and should be sharp and precise so it does not become a distraction. Flags need to be opened at their full potential in order to be seen, and should hit at the precise moment of their intended callback as a highlight to an additional prop. Palms need to indicate a specific color. For this reason, using mixed colored palms does not help engage and promote crowd participation, and therefore would be an improper use of a prop, as with lifting a blue palm when expecting a callback to the color white. Megaphones can be great crowd builders, but don't forget their original purpose is to increase volume. So just don't use them to beat and set the tempo, but also use them to enhance the volumes of the words being spoken. Most importantly, always remember quality over quantity when it comes to prop utilization. It's not about having every prop on the mat, but using them in the most effective manner. Execution of tumbling and stunts is proper technique, stability, synchronization, and spacing in both the sideline and cheer, and is the last category for both score sheets. This is focused on just that. How well are the skills being executed? Notice, up to this point, difficulty is never brought up and still has not been brought up. Of course, we have already covered skill practicality, but remember, the execution of the skills can affect the practicality of the skills. Proper technique is watched in all positions of stunts, each individual tumbling skill, and remember, stability is crucial because any skill performed without stability are now also affecting those other score sheet categories. Sync and spacing are also covered in this score, keeping in mind the timing of each skill performed in sync, as well as the spacing of the formations used. This score is not about the formation types, so it's not a choreography-based score, but the execution of those formations. And finally, this score sheet ends with overall impression. This score is a collaboration of everything the score sheet already encompasses. Was the team able to lead the crowd effectively and encourage participation and spirit boosting for their audience? And did these sections show athleticism? This is the small portion of the score sheet where difficulty can play a very, very small role in the overall performance of the routine. Again, remember, a routine that is too difficult and not practical could have a greater impact on the score than the impact it could on other scores than the impact it could have out of all the things a judge is looking for when it comes to the overall impression score. Did the team keep the crowd entertained? Keep in mind that a routine can be crowd effective and entertaining, but this is more about engaging rather than stopping between sideline and cheer and not spiriting or having moments that are clearly built-in breather moments that stop engaging or that overall spirited energy that the team should exude during the routines. Of course, bringing everything together is that execution. Were the cheer and sideline sections well executed, and were they safe and solid performances. When incorporating skills into the sideline, cheer, and even that fight song, stunts need to be incorporated that help enhance the ability to see and lead the crowd. These will be your extensions, or even just a prep, your libs, and maybe even some hitches. Of course, whatever is solid while continuing to lead the crowd when in the air and does not restrict the bass's voices. Tumbling and even jumps need to follow the three S's. Single skills performed synchronized. So synchronized, single skills. Sync skills will always be better than highlighting individual skills, unless using a standing tumbling skill and a ripple that makes sense with a callback or a spell out. Using jump to tumble combos are a way of performing rather than engaging and leading, so I would not recommend putting these in your routine. And of course, remember these skills need to be solid and performed well, but do not inhibit the team's ability to lead the crowd. And a fall or execution error in any skill, whether tumbling or stunts, will have an impact on the score sheet of most categories. So keep that in mind when thinking about what stunts you want to utilize. Are they inhibiting of your team's ability to lead the crowd? And are they going to be able to be performed and executed well without risk of any fall? Now, let's take a look at the band chant and fight song. The band chant is the opening of the routine and the first thing performed for the judges. This should be something similar to a 30-second timeout at a game and should emphasize both crowd appeal as well as practicality. No stunts or tumbling are permitted in this section. However, jumps and kicks would be allowed. Leading the crowd in the band chant is essential, so using props would be necessary, which could be palms or even flags or signs are things you should consider. Crowd leading tools is its own category on this score sheet, so not utilizing any props would result in a 0. The fight song, however, can incorporate stunts and tumbling. Just like the cheer and sideline, skills need to be incorporated for the bottom score of the score sheet, which is execution of these skills, as well as the second score on the score sheet, which is the practicality of your incorporation. The skills incorporated during the fight song should be practical, so easy to execute solid 10 out of 10 times, and performed with stability and incorporated to assist in leading and engaging the crowd. If these skills are not stable, you're not going to be able to lead the crowd while in the air. And remember, the fight song is restricted to 3 consecutive 8 counts of skill in court. Game day visual appeal is the first scoring category on each score sheet for your band chant and your fight song section. This score is reflective of the choreography structure of each of these sections. Here, the judges are looking at the level changes used, use of the floor space throughout the band chant and fight song, the flow of these sections from beginning to end, and the formations used throughout both sections. Now, level changes and use of floor do not mean actually dropping to the floor or using transitions such as seat rolls. These are not practical for every game day situation, as tracks could be rocky, fields could be muddy, or barriers could cut off all athletes once they are on the ground. Use of floor is focusing on the width of the floor space used throughout to maximize crowd participation and crowd coverage. And variety of formations is more the utilization of multiple stages of lines throughout the routines in a sideline formation. Formations such as bowling pins or other tight formations that set to the center are for performing and entertaining, not necessarily crowd leading, as your entire sides of your crowds are left with nobody focusing on engaging them. Our next 2 categories of the score sheet are material relevant to the game day environment for band chant and effectiveness of in-court for fight song. This is where the judges can focus in on the actual moves utilized throughout the routine. So, again, seat rolls are not practical and cannot lead the crowd. Were callbacks inserted at appropriate moments in the music that lead the crowd? Was the routine more of a performance dance rather than a way to get the crowd to join in setting a beat and again inserting those use of callbacks? For fight song, were the skills incorporated practical and able to enhance the team's ability to lead the crowd while entertaining, not just inserted for performance. For band chant, the last two categories are motion technique, and then the last scoring category is crowd leading tools. For the fight song, this will remain a combined score as execution is back on this section of the score sheet with the ability to incorporate skills. Judges are looking for motion placement, sharpness, sync of motions, and the strength of those motions. The overall technique, which will focus on the team's ability to execute cheer dance style motions, as well as for your band chant, timing, so think the ability to stay to count with each motion performed. This is also considered in motion placement when you are looking at fight song for both the motions in the air, on the ground, as well as the placement of your props. Spacing throughout each formation, keeping in mind crowd coverage, should be displayed throughout both sections. However, this is going to be considered in your motion technique score for the band chant. And of course, for your fight song or band chant, the effective and proper use of those props as discussed for the cheer and sideline. Again, remember, for band chant, this is its own category, so you need to include those props in order to not receive a 0. Execution of skills is the final category of the fight song. This is not on your band chant score sheet, section of the score sheet, and this is looking at the technique of the skills both by the basses as well as the top person, the stability of the skills incorporated into the fight song, the sync of those skills, and the execution of spacing throughout the fight song. Spacing and sync are considered an execution on the fight song portion and in motion technique, again, as mentioned before, on the band chant portion of the score sheet. As discussed for cheer and sideline, band chant and fight song also have an overall impression score. This is going to include the energy and connection with the crowd, the ability to lead the crowd, maintaining not just the energy, but maintaining the entertainment value throughout both dances, and not having drastic pauses in the ability to perform and execute by using things such as backwards moving transitions that leave the crowd watching the athletes' backs, as well as all transitions between band chant to sideline and cheer to the fight song. Did these remain entertaining and energetic? And were the transitions during band chant and fight song purposeful and seamless? Athleticism and that slight consideration of difficulty could also be considered in this overall score, but should not impact or make the bulk of the score unless it were to have been poorly executed and affecting the routine as a whole, which affects everything else covered under overall impression. This concludes the game day training. If you have further questions, feel free to email either Frank or myself, Medea, for additional questions.